If you happen to live in New Zealand or currently vacationing there, then Pokemon Pocket's soft launch is available to you. And while there's still a lot of time before people really start getting fleshed out decks, you guys know that I am ever curious to know what the most competitive side of things are going to be. So with that in mind, I figured it'd be a great place to start with the first 4 original starters and how I would build out their decks. 3+1, depending on how you categorize it, but anyways. As you go through the Pokemon Pocket tutorial, you'll have an option of which pack you'd like to start opening to go through the tutorial. This does actually dictate which starter you will start with. So just keep in mind that if you like a full art Charmander, you'll go with the Charizard pack. If you'd like a Squirtle, you'll go with the Pikachu pack. And then finally, if you'd like a Bulbasaur, you would go with the Mewtwo pack. Before we get into the actual deck builds, something I'd like to keep in mind is the fact that there are a few staple cards that are likely going to see play in most every deck this early on with the given card pool. This is totally normal when it comes to early metas of brand new games. It is typical for some of the best things you could be doing to see play across all of the decks, especially in Pokemon, where cards that allow you to draw additional cards or have additional utility to be able to close out the game are really valuable. Specific to Pokemon Pocket, we're looking at 3 item cards and 2 supporter cards. The first of which is Pokeball, which will allow you to get a basic out of your deck into your hand. This is random, however, does add the consistency, especially for these decks where we're looking to get into our stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon. Then there's Potion. You would be surprised how impactful that 20 HP will be, especially since buying an extra turn can mean the difference between winning or losing a game. Red card is a card that can destroy your opponent's game plan depending on how they've been able to dig. If you ever find yourself playing against other setup decks like Venusaur, Blastoise, or Charizard, being able to send those evolution stages back to the hand or really disrupt their game plan can make a big difference. Moving on to the supporter side, and reminder, you can only play one of these per turn. We start off with Professor's Research. A staple in the TCG and a staple here, doesn't draw 7, but drawing 2 is pretty good. And finally, we have Sabrina, which will force your opponent to have to switch out their active Pokemon. A powerful card that'll be able to take out a Pokemon that your opponent is setting up in the bench or to be able to close out the game. With those staples aside, let's take a look at the actual decks. For just about most of these builds, we're actually only really going to have to fill out 10 different cards because of the 10 staples we're starting with. As the meta shifts and evolves, I do think there's room to be able to change these around. Maybe Potion doesn't end up being as impactful, especially for something like the Venusaur deck, which has some innate healing, or Red card may not be as impactful because of the typical low hand sizes of the game. Nevertheless, these are great starting points that you'll be able to elevate as the meta shifts. So to kick it off, of course, if we want to be a Venusaur deck, then we need the entire line. As of Genetic Apex, there is only 1 Bulbasaur and 1 Ivysaur to include in our deck. So they're not fantastic, but we need them there. And then finally, there's Venusaur GX. Now, this is an EX high rarity card, but thankfully the base versions are actually not too bad themselves. So if you want to add those into your deck as you're slowly building up into the EX version of these cards, then I think that fits perfectly fine. Venusaur EX as a payoff allows you to be able to heal as he does 100 damage, and that healing can very much help with the sustain of the deck. Granted, acceleration is the name of the game, and we actually find that in the Lilligant line. Looking at Pet Lily first, 60 HP with a 10 damage attack that says heal 10 from this Pokemon. In the early stages of the game where your opponent might be playing something like a Meowth, this actually can help you mitigate some early chip damage that can allow for an easy KO further on. And then finally, when we look at Lilligant, we have a 100 HP stage 1 Pokemon with Leaf Supply, a 50 damage attack for 2 energy that says take a grass energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your benched Pokemon, thus allowing you to accelerate your Venusaur to close out the game. Moving on over to the Charizard line, we're including 2 Charmanders, 2 Charmeleons, 2 Charizard EXs, which once again could just be base Charizards if that's all you have. And then the biggest difference here is that we have Moltres EX. So we're leaning on the power of another EX Pokemon to be able to accelerate our board. Moltres EX is a 140 HP Pokemon, and for 1 fire energy can use Inferno Dance. Flip 3 coins, and for the amount of heads that you get, you may place that many fire energy onto your benched fire Pokemon in any way that you like, which is phenomenal with Charizard when you consider that Crimson Storm can one-hit KO any Pokemon. Leaning on just Charizard, though, can be a little bit risky, especially when you consider that Moltres can't accelerate onto itself, which means if you want to do 70 damage, it's going to take 3 turns. That's where we bring in the Growlithe line, Growlithe being nothing too impressive. However, does allow us to go into Arcanine EX, which for 3 energy will allow us to do 120 damage. 120 being a very important damage threshold when you consider that Pikachu EX has 120 HP. And I have my suspicions that Pikachu is going to be an incredibly powerful deck. To make that all fit in, we go ahead and cut out 1 red card from our deck list. Moving on over to water, and we have some of the most powerful acceleration in the game, assuming you get a little lucky. Here, the build is very simple. We kick it off with our line of Squirtle, Wartortle into Blastoise EX, a 180 stage 2 Pokemon with the attack Hydro Bazooka. If this Pokemon has at least 2 extra water energy attached, this attack does 60 more damage, making it a 160 damage attack. In a similar vein, we take a look at Lapras with Hydro Pump. For 1 water energy, does 20 damage. However, if you have an extra 3 water energy attached to this Pokemon, it does 70 more damage, making it a 90 damage attack for 4 energy. That is a lot of energy though, but thankfully Misty is potentially some of the most powerful energy acceleration in the game. Her supporter card says, choose one of your water Pokemon and flip coins until you hit tails. For each heads that you hit, attach a water energy onto it from the energy zone. It is random, which leads to a level of inconsistency, but thankfully all you really need to hit is 1 50-50 to really make it worth it. Accelerating 1 energy is plenty in this game at the moment to at least get you started. And then on the high roll side, 1 Misty can load up your Blastoise or your Lapras with the necessary 4 and 6 energy to get the full damage through, which is absolutely nuts. And finally, we're closing out with Pikachu, and I expect this to be one of the best decks in the format just because of how everything plays out. Like most of our other decks, we're starting up with our lineup of 10 cards, and then looking into Pokemon, we have Pikachu EX, a basic EX Pokemon with 120 HP, and for 2 energy, Circle Circuit does 30 damage for each of your bench Pokemon, meaning without anyone in the back row, it could be 0, or with a full bench will do 90 damage for 2 energy. Pikachu is incredibly powerful because it enables you to be able to go low commitment deck building, not needing to rely on evolving a bunch of Pokemon to be able to dish out some really consistent early damage. Of course, to flesh out the strategy, we need a lot of basic Pokemon to be able to make sure our board is always full. To kick that off, we lean onto Electabuzz, a 70 HP Pokemon with Thunder Punch. For 2 energy, flip a coin. If heads, this 40 attack damage will do an additional 40 damage. If tails, Electabuzz does 20 damage onto itself, which isn't preferable, but a potential 80 damage attack for 2 is very solid when we consider that a Circle Circuit caps out at only 10 above that. Then we've got Zapdos EX, a 130 base HP Pokemon with Peck for 20 damage, and for 3 energy, Thundering Hurricane will deal 50 for every head you're able to hit on 4 coin flips. The name of the game with the Pikachu deck is very much relying on strong basic Pokemon to force your opponent into a position where they just lose because they're not able to hold back. So the fact that we have Zapdos, which could potentially deal 200 damage, which can OHKO anything in the game, is very important for those sticky late game situations, which is exactly why we actually include the other Pikachu line. Standard Pikachu is nothing too amazing, just a 60 base HP with a 20 damage attack. However, it does allow us to be able to evolve into Raichu, a 100 HP Pokemon with Thunderbolt. For 3 energy, you're able to deal 140 damage, though you do discard all energy from this Pokemon. We haven't seen any energy acceleration for this deck, which it doesn't really need. Pikachu only needs 2 energy to start doing Circle Circuit. However, when we're in a late game position where maybe Pikachu shouldn't be standing in the active slot because it's threatened to be KO'd in a way that could make us lose, that's where we lean on the power of Lieutenant Surge. He allows us to move all Thunder energy from our bench onto our active Pokemon as long as it's a Raichu, Electrode, or an Electabuzz. This allows us in the late game to be able to lean on our Electabuzz or our Raichu to be able to deal that additional damage, which will hopefully allow us to be able to close out the game. I want to iterate that these are just starting points, but kind of where I think if you want to play any of these starter Pokemon decks, where you want to lean into. And while the original 3 starters do take up some setup, I think their EX cards are extremely powerful, and I don't think you'll be disappointed working your way towards those decks. Of course, I don't expect most people to have all of the cards available for these decks right away as we slowly open packs and get ourselves material to be able to craft some of the cards. So with that in mind, there are a few substitutions I think you can include to be able to bridge your way into the final version of these builds. As I had mentioned previously, Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise all have fantastic base forms, which work as a slightly weaker version of their EX variants, but are all plenty fine in terms of just being able to get off the ground. As far as some basic Pokemon of their similar types to be able to fill in the gaps, I think Pinsir and Heatmor fill some great roles as some low to the ground basic Pokemon that are able to deal some damage. And on the water side, I think Psyduck is super annoying. Headache allows you to be able to stall out your opponent's supporter plays, which could potentially prevent them from being able to disrupt you or be able to dig into the cards that they need. On the colorless side, I've personally been really enjoying Meowth. The 1 energy to allow you to draw into your deck has been really useful in terms of digging for those additional evolution lines, so I highly recommend that as a flex slot in your earlier builds. And then alternatively, we can look at Kangaskhan and Tauros, which both have a base 100 HP and can dish out a sizable amount of damage for low energy commitment, allowing you to slowly build up your bench. There's no ranked ladder in the game yet, but I don't doubt in the community's drive to want to see how far we can take these decks. Which deck are you guys going to start working your way towards? Let me know in the comments down below. And trust me when I tell you, there are a lot of decks that we can actually build in this with the amount of Pokemon that we have provided in this first set. So you guys are definitely going to want to hit that subscribe button as we push out even more and more deck lists. With that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one.